The workshop was always alive with the sound of hammers, wrenches, and engines roaring to life. The air carried the smell of oil and grease, something that most people found unpleasant, but for Aisha it felt familiar, almost comforting. She had spent countless afternoons there, sitting quietly on a wooden stool in the corner, watching her father repair cars with patience and care. Her father, Yasin, was known in the neighborhood as a skilled mechanic, someone who could fix almost anything on four wheels. Customers trusted him, and other workers respected his dedication. For Aisha, he was not just her father, but also her teacher in ways he did not even realize. The workshop belonged to a man named Farouk, a tall, sharp-looking boss who enjoyed showing authority. He was not cruel, but he carried an arrogance that made everyone nervous around him. He liked to remind the mechanics that the business ran under his name, and without him, none of them would have work. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was usually at someone's expense. He often ignored Aisha's presence, as though a girl in a workshop was nothing more than a visitor who should sit quietly. The workers had grown used to seeing her, but none of them expected her to ever touch an engine. On one particular afternoon, when the sun was still high and the day felt heavy with heat, Mr. Farouk entered the workshop with an unusual expression. He was followed by two men who carried a strange-looking engine. It was large, heavy, and covered in dust, as though it had been lying unused for a long time. The workers gathered around, curious about what kind of challenge this was going to bring. Mr. Farouk clapped his hands to get everyone's attention and announced that the engine was from an imported car, a model that was rare and expensive. According to him, the engine had failed completely, and several workshops had already tried and given up on repairing it. He looked at his mechanics one by one, almost daring them to succeed where others had failed. The men got to work. They wiped it down, examined its complicated system of wires and pipes, and tried to understand why it wouldn't start. Hours passed, and despite their effort, the engine remained stubborn. The workers' confidence began to fade, and even Yasin, who had fixed countless engines in his career, shook his head slowly. It was not that he lacked skill, but this machine was different. Its design was advanced, something unfamiliar to those who were used to repairing local vehicles. Frustration filled the air, and Mr. Farouk's smirk grew wider. He enjoyed watching his workers struggle, not because he wanted them to fail, but because it gave him another chance to remind them who was in charge. As the mechanics gave up one by one, Aisha's eyes kept following every move. She had been observing silently from her usual stool, her small notebook resting on her lap. For months, she had been writing down things she noticed in the workshop, different parts of engines, the way her father adjusted valves, the tricks he used to test wiring. At home, she often flipped through her father's old manuals, books filled with diagrams and instructions, though most of the workers never bothered to read them. She might have been young, but she carried a curiosity that refused to sleep. Suddenly, Mr. Farouk's gaze shifted toward her. Perhaps it was her focused eyes, or maybe he simply wanted to mock her presence. With a sarcastic laugh, he said, "Why don't we let the mechanic's daughter try? Maybe she can do what none of you could." The workshop burst into laughter. Some workers chuckled loudly, while others hid their smiles out of respect for Yasin. Aisha froze. She was used to being invisible, but now every eye was on her. Her father frowned, his protective instinct telling him she should stay out of it, but before he could speak, Farouk pressed further. "Come on, little girl. Show us what you've got. Or are you afraid?" Aisha's heart raced. Part of her wanted to run, to hide behind the walls and forget this ever happened. But another part, stronger and braver, whispered that this was her moment. She remembered all those evenings when she sat cross-legged on the floor at home, studying the diagrams her father had tossed aside. She remembered the excitement she felt whenever she solved a small puzzle in her mind about how machines worked. She took a deep breath and stood up, her hands trembling slightly but her eyes steady. The workers fell silent as she walked toward the engine. Some shook their heads, expecting a disaster. Others watched with curiosity, wondering if she would even know how to hold the tools. Mr. Farouk crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, his smirk fixed in place. Aisha reached the engine and ran her fingers lightly over its surface, as if greeting an old friend. She bent down, inspecting the wires and bolts, noticing small details that had gone unnoticed in the rush to repair it. For a long moment, she said nothing. The room grew tense. It was not the kind of silence that comes with boredom, but the silence that comes when everyone is waiting for the unexpected. She finally asked for a few simple tools: a wrench, a screwdriver, and a cleaning cloth. The request itself made some men laugh quietly. What could she possibly do with such basic things? But Yasin, though worried, handed her what she needed. He recognized the determination in her eyes, a look he had only seen when he himself was deeply focused on solving a problem. She wiped a small valve, adjusted a connection, and tilted her head as though listening to the machine speak. Every move she made was slow and careful, not rushed like the others had been. She was not trying to show off. She was simply trying to understand. Mr. Farouk tapped his foot impatiently. Any day now, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for others to hear. But even he could not hide his curiosity. There was something unusual about the way Aisha was working. It was not random, not clumsy. She moved with a strange confidence, one that did not match her young age. The workers leaned closer, some whispering to each other that maybe she knew something they did not. Her father stood a few steps behind, torn between pride and fear. He knew how cruel the world could be to someone who dared to step out of the roles people expected. He did not want his daughter to be laughed at or humiliated. But he also knew that once she made up her mind, nothing could stop her. And in that moment, he saw a spark in her that reminded him of his own younger self, back when he was just starting out in the world of mechanics with nothing but determination and curiosity to guide him. As the sun lowered outside, casting long shadows into the workshop, Aisha continued to examine the engine with steady hands. She had not yet proven anything, but the air around her had changed. The laughter had stopped. The whispers had died down. Even the arrogant boss, though still wearing his smirk, watched her with sharper eyes than before. Something was unfolding, something none of them had expected when he first threw out his mocking challenge. And though the engine was still silent, another engine, one deep inside Aisha's heart, had already roared to life. It was the engine of confidence, the courage to step forward when no one believed in her. And that, more than anything else, was about to change the story of that workshop forever. The workshop felt different the moment Aisha touched the engine. The same men who had laughed earlier now leaned on their tools, pretending not to care but secretly watching her every move. She was still young, still just the daughter of a mechanic in their eyes, yet something about her calmness unsettled them. She did not look like someone who had been forced into a dare. She looked like someone who had chosen to step into the challenge. Her hands were small compared to the heavy tools she held, but she gripped them with a surprising steadiness. She wiped a layer of dust from one side of the engine, exposing the hidden marks that had been ignored. She bent down to examine the wiring, her eyes moving carefully, as though she were reading a book. For a while, she did not speak, and that silence made everyone restless. Mr. Farouk cleared his throat loudly, trying to remind her that he was the one in control, but Aisha kept her focus. She remembered all those times she sat in the workshop after school, when the workers had gone home and her father stayed behind to finish a job. She would sit on the stool, watching him work late into the night. Sometimes, he explained what he was doing, not because he thought she needed to know, but because talking aloud helped him think. Other times, she simply watched in silence, memorizing the movements of his hands, the way he tested connections, the way he paused to listen to the smallest sound an engine made. All of those little lessons had stayed with her. Now, in front of so many eyes, they came back like guiding voices in her mind. She slowly adjusted a few loose bolts, nothing dramatic, but each twist of her wrist was done with purpose. She asked one of the workers to hand her a small cleaning brush. At first, he looked at her in disbelief, but when her father gave a nod, he passed it along. She began brushing away the dirt from the corners of the machine, places that most of the men had ignored, thinking they were unimportant. But to Aisha, every detail mattered. She believed that sometimes the smallest thing could be the reason behind the biggest problem. The laughter from earlier had faded, replaced by whispers. "What does she think she's doing?" one man murmured. Another shook his head, saying, "It's useless, this engine is too advanced. Even we couldn't fix it." But none of them walked away. Something about her confidence, however quiet, kept them standing there. Mr. Farouk folded his arms, tapping his finger on his elbow. His smirk remained, but deep down, he was curious. He had only dared her as a joke, a way to remind everyone of his authority. Yet, as he watched her work, he noticed something unusual. Most beginners would rush or panic under so many stairs, but this girl didn't. She seemed to have shut out the entire world, focused only on the machine in front of her. It annoyed him, but it also made him uneasy. Yasin, her father, stood a little behind, his heart heavy with mixed emotions. He wanted to protect her from embarrassment, to tell her she didn't need to prove anything. Yet, at the same time, he couldn't bring himself to stop her. He had seen that spark in her eyes before, the spark of someone who truly wanted to understand, not just pretend. He realized that this moment was no longer just about the engine. It was about his daughter showing the world something that even he had not fully acknowledged, that she had her own gift. As the minutes passed, Aisha continued her quiet inspection. She noticed that one of the smaller pipes was slightly misaligned, almost hidden beneath the larger parts. She leaned closer, her fingers tracing its etch. It reminded her of a diagram she had once studied in her father's old manual. She remembered how certain imported engines had hidden adjustment points that many mechanics overlooked. Could this be one of those cases? She straightened up and asked for a screwdriver. This time, nobody laughed. The tool was handed to her quickly, without question. She carefully adjusted the small pipe, tightening it into place. Then, she paused again, almost as if listening. The workers grew restless. They were not used to this slow, thoughtful approach. Usually, mechanics tried one thing after another in frustration until something worked. But Aisha worked differently. She was not guessing, she was observing. After making a few adjustments, she asked for a bit of engine oil. She poured just a drop on a stuck valve, gently moving it back and forth until it loosened. The sound it made was small, almost unnoticeable, but she smiled faintly. She knew she was making progress. One of the younger workers whispered, "Did you hear that? She's doing something right." Another quickly hushed him, but everyone had heard it. For the first time, hope stirred among them. Mr. Farouk shifted his stance, his smirk faltering ever so slightly. He still believed she would fail eventually, but he no longer looked so confident. He was watching too closely now, his eyes following every move she made. Finally, Aisha stepped back and wiped her hands on the cloth. She did not announce anything, did not claim victory. She simply looked at the engine again, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew it would not start just yet, but she also knew she had uncovered something important. It was as though the machine had whispered a secret to her, one that the others had been too impatient to hear. Her father approached quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. His eyes spoke louder than words. He was proud, even if the engine was not yet running. She had shown courage that even grown men often lacked. She had accepted a dare meant to humiliate her, and instead of shrinking away, She had turned it into an opportunity. The workshop grew quiet again, but this time the silence was not heavy with mockery. It was filled with an unspoken respect, one that no one wanted to admit out loud yet. Even those who doubted her began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she saw something they could not. Aisha did not care about their whispers anymore. In her mind, the challenge was no longer about proving herself to them. It was about solving a puzzle, about listening to the voice of the engine and giving it what it needed. She had stepped into the arena as a joke, but now she stood there as someone who had earned their attention. As the evening light faded, the workers slowly returned to their benches, pretending to continue their tasks, but their eyes kept drifting back to the young girl bent over the engine. The air carried a new kind of energy, one that none of them could deny. Something was beginning, something they could not yet name. And though the engine remained silent for now, everyone in the room knew that this was only the beginning of a story that would not be forgotten. The next morning, the workshop was filled with the usual noise of clanging tools, rolling tires, and customers discussing their vehicle troubles. Yet, hidden beneath all of that routine, there was something different in the air. Everyone was still thinking about what had happened the day before. Aisha had dared to touch an engine that none of the trained mechanics could fix, and instead of making a fool of herself, she had surprised them with her calm approach. Some of the workers were still skeptical. They believed she had only tightened a few screws and cleaned some parts, nothing that would truly make a difference. Others, however, could not ignore the way she had worked. She had seen things that all of them had missed. And that thought quietly troubled them, because it meant that a girl, someone without formal training, might actually know more than they did. Mr. Farouk walked into the workshop with his usual confident stride. He never liked admitting when something unsettled him, but even he couldn't deny that the memory of Aisha working on the engine kept replaying in his head. He had thrown the challenge at her as a joke, expecting laughter and failure, yet the outcome had not gone the way he planned. Though the engine had not roared to life yet, something about the way she touched it made him curious. He wasn't ready to say it out loud, but he was starting to wonder if she might actually have potential. Still, his pride would never allow him to show that thought openly. Aisha returned to the workshop with her father, carrying the same small notebook that she always kept with her. She had spent the night flipping through her father's old manuals, searching for diagrams of imported engines. She had found drawings that reminded her of the one in the workshop, with hidden adjustment points and different wiring systems compared to the local ones. She felt more confident now, even though she knew the real test was still ahead. As soon as she walked in, the workers exchanged glances. Some smirked, whispering among themselves, but others gave her respectful nods, small signs that they had begun to look at her differently. Aisha ignored all of it. Her eyes went straight to the engine, as if it were calling her back. She walked toward it with determination, and once again the workshop grew quieter than usual. She began her inspection from the beginning. This time, she worked with even more focus. She opened small sections, checking the valves, observing the wires, and comparing them with what she had read the night before. When one of the mechanics laughed and muttered that she was wasting her time, she did not react. She had learned quickly that the more she responded to mockery, the less energy she had left for the real task. So, she let their words fade away like background noise. Slowly, she started explaining out loud what she was noticing. "This engine is different from the local ones," she said softly, not for show but simply as part of her thought process. "The wiring here isn't placed like the ones you usually see. It's connected in a different pattern, that's why the signals don't reach properly." Her words made some of the workers exchange uneasy looks. They had all worked on wiring the day before, but none of them had mentioned such a thing. Her father listened carefully, his eyes full of quiet pride. He knew she had been learning more than he realized, but hearing her explain details of an advanced engine out loud was something new even for him. He could see that she wasn't just guessing, she actually understood. Aisha continued working, explaining how imported engines often had hidden adjustment points that were not obvious to the eye. She showed them a small section near the corner, where a screw was out of alignment. "This," she said, pointing to it, "is why the balance is off. It looks minor, but it affects the whole system." The workers leaned closer, surprised to see what she was pointing at. Some admitted silently that they had overlooked it, while others still tried to convince themselves it didn't matter. But as she adjusted the screw, the engine shifted slightly, almost as though responding to her touch. That small movement silenced the last of the laughter in the workshop. She then picked up a cleaning cloth and carefully wiped down a part that had been clogged with dust and oil. "Engines breathe," she explained softly, "and when something blocks their way, they can't run, no matter how much you push them." The men stared at her. None of them had ever described a machine like that before. They treated engines as stubborn objects that either worked or didn't. But Aisha spoke about it as though it were alive, as though it had a voice waiting to be heard. As the day went on, she kept working in short, steady steps. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She simply observed, adjusted, and explained whenever necessary. The more she spoke, the more the workers realized she wasn't just repeating something she had memorized. She was thinking, analyzing, and connecting ideas in real time. Mr. Farouk tried to maintain his authority by commenting here and there, saying things like, "Don't waste too much time," or "I doubt this will change anything." But even he couldn't hide the fact that he was now watching her with real interest. His smirk had faded, replaced by narrowed eyes that studied her every move. At one point, she discovered that one of the wires had been wrongly connected. It looked fine on the surface, but she realized from the diagram in her notebook that it belonged in a different place. She carefully disconnected it and fixed it where it was meant to go. When she was done, she nodded to herself. "Now it will at least respond," she whispered. The workers waited, their breaths caught between doubt and hope. She wasn't ready to start the engine yet, but they could all feel that something was changing. For the first time, the impossible engine no longer felt impossible. It felt like it was slowly being understood. Her father could not help but smile. He had seen many skilled mechanics in his life, but he had rarely seen anyone work with such patience and sensitivity. He realized then that Aisha's gift was not just knowledge, it was the way she connected with the machines. She didn't treat them as puzzles to be forced open. She treated them as companions that needed to be listened to. That was something no manual could ever teach. By the time the evening arrived, Aisha had not yet brought the engine to life, but she had uncovered problems no one else had noticed. She had explained things the trained workers had never thought about. She had shifted the atmosphere of the entire workshop. The men who once mocked her now stood quieter, more thoughtful, even a little embarrassed. Mr. Farouk finally cleared his throat and said, "Enough for today. Let's see what happens tomorrow." His voice was firm, but anyone listening closely could hear the hesitation hidden within it. He was no longer as sure of himself as before. As Aisha packed her notebook and cleaned her hands, her father walked beside her. "You've done more than I ever imagined," he said softly. "Whatever happens next, I'm proud." She smiled at him, tired but satisfied. She knew she still had work to do, but she also knew she was closer than ever to proving that she belonged in this world of machines. And deep down, everyone in that workshop knew that what was once a simple dare had now turned into something much bigger. Something that was about to change not only Aisha's life, but also the way they all looked at her forever. The next morning, the workers came earlier than usual. The workshop was buzzing with curiosity before the doors had even fully opened. Word had spread beyond the workshop walls. Some customers who had heard whispers of the mechanic's daughter trying to fix the impossible engine also came, pretending to check on their cars but secretly eager to see what would happen next. The old imported engine sat in the center of the room like a stubborn giant, waiting to reveal whether it would finally live again. Aisha walked in quietly with her father. She didn't enter with the pride of someone who wanted applause. She entered with the focus of someone who had unfinished work. She held her small notebook in her hand as always, her companion filled with sketches and notes. Her eyes immediately went to the engine, as if nothing else in the room mattered. The men greeted Yasin respectfully, but their eyes couldn't help sliding toward his daughter. Some smiled faintly, no longer mocking, but curious. Others kept serious faces, not yet ready to admit they respected her. Mr. Farouk stood near his desk, watching with his usual folded arms. His smirk had not returned since the last evening. Instead, he looked thoughtful, as though he was preparing himself for whatever surprise the day would bring. Aisha set her notebook down and rolled up her sleeves. She didn't ask for anyone's attention, yet all eyes followed her as she began. She checked the wiring she had fixed the previous day, making sure the connections were tight. Then she inspected the valve she had loosened with a drop of oil. Slowly, carefully, she moved through the engine as though revisiting old friends. Every motion carried patience. After a while, she asked her father to help her hold one part steady while she adjusted another. He did as she asked, quietly following her lead. This alone was shocking for the workers. Yasin, the experienced mechanic they all respected, was now assisting his daughter instead of leading her. It was a sight that shifted something deep in the minds of those watching. Finally, Aisha stepped back. She took a deep breath, her hands slightly trembling from both effort and anticipation. She nodded to one of the workers standing nearby and said, "Try now. Switch it on." The worker hesitated, glancing at Mr. Farouk, who gave a small nod. The switch was pressed, and the engine groaned. For a moment, nothing happened. The sound was weak, like a tired cough. Some men shook their heads, convinced it was another failure. But Aisha didn't flinch. She leaned forward again, listening carefully, her face thoughtful. "It's responding," she said calmly. "But it's still not free. The air path is blocked." She quickly bent down and checked a small filter section that had been overlooked by everyone else. Pulling it out, she revealed layers of dust and grease clogging it completely. The workers gasped softly. It was so simple, yet so easy to miss. She cleaned it carefully, put it back, and then gave another nod. "Now," she said. The switch was pressed again. This time, the engine gave a stronger sound. It didn't start fully, but it coughed louder, like it was trying to wake up from a long sleep. The entire workshop leaned closer, hearts beating faster. Some mechanics who had mocked her earlier now whispered to each other, unable to hide their excitement. Mr. Farouk's eyes widened slightly, though he quickly tried to hide it. He told himself it might just be luck. Yet, deep down, he knew luck could not explain the precision of her work. Aisha didn't pause. She wiped sweat from her forehead, picked up her notebook, and quickly checked her notes. She had drawn a small diagram of how the wiring should flow. She realized there was still one more adjustment needed. With steady hands, she reconnected the last wire. Her father held the tool for her as she tightened it. When she was done, she closed the panel and stood straight. This time, her voice carried a quiet confidence. "Now it should start." The room went silent. Even the sound of other tools stopped as everyone gathered around. The switch was pressed once more. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then, with a sudden roar, it came alive. The sound was so loud and powerful that it echoed through the workshop. Sparks of life filled the air as the impossible machine finally breathed again. For a moment, nobody moved. The workers stared in disbelief, their mouths open, their tools frozen in their hands. Then, slowly, cheers erupted. Hands clapped, voices shouted, and laughter filled the room, not mocking laughter this time, but pure joy. The men who had once doubted her now celebrated with wide smiles. Even customers who had come only to watch applauded, amazed at what they had witnessed. Yasin's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his daughter. His heart swelled with pride, more than he had ever felt before. He had spent his life building a name as a mechanic, but in one day, his daughter had done something that would be remembered for years. Mr. Farouk, the proud boss, stood speechless. He tried to keep his serious face, but it was impossible to hide the shock in his eyes. The very dare he had given to mock her had turned into the moment that silenced even him. Finally, after a long pause, he walked forward slowly. The workshop quieted down, waiting to hear what he would say. He looked at Aisha, his expression unreadable. For a few seconds, the air was heavy with tension. Then, at last, he gave a small smile and said, "You've done what even my best men couldn't do. You've given life to an engine that everyone else declared dead. That deserves respect." The workers nodded, their agreement loud and clear. Some clapped again, others patted Aisha's shoulder as she stood there, her face calm but her eyes glowing with pride. She did not boast, she did not brag. She simply gave a small smile and said, "I only used what I learned from my father and the books he kept. The engine just needed someone to listen to it." The words touched everyone. She had not only fixed the engine, she had taught them a lesson in patience, humility, and respect. Machines were not just metal and wires, they required attention and understanding. From that day forward, nobody in the workshop looked at her the same way. She was no longer just the mechanic's daughter. She had earned her own place among them. The engine continued to roar steadily, filling the room with its powerful sound. It was not only the machine that had been brought back to life, but also the belief that knowledge and talent had no limits, not of age, not of gender, not of expectations. Aisha stood quietly beside her father, soaking in the moment. She didn't need applause. The sound of the engine itself was enough. It was her victory, her proof, her answer to all the laughter and doubts. And it was only the beginning. The engine kept roaring, steady and strong, and the sound seemed to echo far beyond the workshop walls. The men stood around it, still in awe, some shaking their heads as if they could not believe their own eyes. For a few minutes, nobody wanted to move. They simply watched the machine that had been called impossible now running perfectly under the hands of a young girl who had once been laughed at. Aisha slowly stepped back, her face calm though her heart raced with excitement. She had never worked on such a big engine before, but her quiet confidence and patience had guided her through. She looked at her father, who smiled with pride, and that smile was enough to make her feel as though she had won the greatest reward in the world. Her father placed his hand gently on her shoulder, his voice trembling slightly as he said, "You have done what many thought could never be done. You didn't only fix an engine, you changed the way people will see you forever." His words sank deep into her heart. The workers, who once teased her, now stood with admiration. Some came forward to congratulate her, shaking her hand or patting her shoulder. A few of them admitted, with honest voices, that they had doubted her but were proud to have been proven wrong. She accepted their words with humility, never once letting pride cloud her expression. Mr. Farouk finally broke his silence. He had been standing near the back, arms still folded, but his eyes never left Aisha. Slowly, he stepped forward. The entire workshop grew quiet, waiting for what he would say. His reputation was that of a proud man who never easily admitted defeat or gave compliments. That made his words all the more important. He stopped in front of Aisha and looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once and said, "You've shocked me, and I don't say that often. When I gave you that dare, I wanted to prove a point that a child, and especially a girl, had no place here. But you've proven me wrong in front of everyone. Today, you've not only repaired an engine, you've taught us all a lesson about courage and patience." The men nodded in agreement, their faces serious now. Everyone felt the weight of the moment. Mr. Farouk continued, "From this day, you are welcome here not just as Yasin's daughter, but as someone with her own skill. If you want, you can even start learning with us officially. This place has room for talent, and you've shown more talent than anyone expected." The words sent a wave of murmurs across the workshop. To receive such recognition from their boss was no small thing. Aisha lowered her eyes respectfully and replied softly, "Thank you, sir. I didn't want to prove myself against anyone. I only wanted to understand the machine and use what I had learned. I still have much more to learn." Her humility impressed everyone even more. She wasn't boasting, she wasn't demanding respect, she was simply being herself, calm and sincere. From that day forward, everything began to change. Customers who came to the workshop started asking about the mechanic's daughter who fixed the impossible engine. Some even requested that she check their cars, curious about her approach. At first, she only watched and assisted, but slowly she began to take small jobs on her own under her father's supervision. She handled them with the same patience and attention she had shown with the big engine. The workers, who once laughed when she picked up tools, now came to her for advice when something seemed confusing. At first, they did it shyly, not wanting to admit openly that they needed her help. But with time, they grew more open, realizing she often noticed small details that they overlooked. Yasin, her father, could hardly contain his pride. For years he had worked hard to give his family respect through his skill, and now his daughter was carrying that legacy further than he ever imagined. In quiet moments, he would tell her, "I see myself in you, but I also see something more, something even I never had. You have a gift, Aisha, and I believe it will take you far." Even Mr. Farouk's attitude softened. He began treating her with respect, asking her opinion during tough jobs. He even brought in more imported engines for her to study, secretly curious to see what she could discover about them. Though his pride still showed now and then, it was clear to everyone that his view of her had completely changed. But the greatest change was not in the boss, the workers, or even the customers, it was in Aisha herself. She no longer sat quietly in the corner, afraid of being noticed. She walked with confidence now, her notebook always in hand, filled with new sketches and notes. She began dreaming bigger dreams, not just of working in her father's workshop but of studying engineering, of building a future where she could design and create machines of her own. Her story spread far beyond the workshop. Neighbors spoke about her, telling others how the mechanic's daughter had done the impossible. School friends who once saw her as quiet and ordinary now looked at her differently. Some teachers encouraged her to pursue higher studies, reminding her that talent like hers deserved the best opportunities. For Aisha, all of this attention was new, but she never let it distract her. She knew that respect was not something given once and kept forever, it had to be earned again and again through hard work and honesty. She promised herself she would keep learning, keep improving, and keep listening to the machines the way she always had. Weeks later, when another difficult engine was brought to the workshop, the workers didn't laugh or doubt. Instead, they stepped aside and asked, "Aisha, will you take a look first?" That single question showed how much had changed. She was no longer seen as an outsider but as part of the team, someone whose presence strengthened them. Her father often watched her quietly, his heart full. He thought back to the day Mr. Farouk had thrown that careless stare at her. What had been meant as a joke had become the turning point of her life. That moment of courage, when she chose to step forward instead of hiding, had changed everything. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the workshop in shades of orange, Aisha stood with her father outside. The sounds of the engine still echoed from inside, but the day's work was over. Her father turned to her and said, "Do you realize what you've done? You've opened a door not just for yourself, but for many others who will hear your story. You've shown that passion and patience matter more than anyone's opinion." Aisha smiled gently. "I didn't think of it like that, Baba. I just wanted to try. I wanted to see if I could help." "And you did," he said proudly. "You helped more than you know." The night grew quiet, but inside Aisha's heart, another sound lived on, the sound of that impossible engine roaring back to life, the sound that told her she was capable of more than she ever imagined. Her journey had only just begun, but one thing was certain, she would never again be just the mechanic's daughter. She was Aisha, the girl who faced a dare, listened to an impossible engine, and shocked everyone by proving that true skill has no limits.